The bitter winter wind howled through Casa Grande, Arizona, as Elizabeth Sutton stumbled off the stagecoach, her fingers numb inside her threadbare gloves. The year was 1878, and the promise of a teaching position that had drawn her west from Boston now seemed like a cruel joke as darkness fell over the frontier town. "Madam, this is your stop," the driver called, tossing down her single battered trunk without ceremony. "Casa Grande, end of the line." Elizabeth stood shivering in the muddy street, surveying the collection of wooden buildings that constituted the main thoroughfare. Oil lamps cast yellow pools of light from windows, and the sounds of piano music and boisterous voices spilled from the saloon. After 3 days of bone-jarring travel, all she wanted was a hot meal and a warm bed. The schoolhouse, according to her correspondence, wouldn't be ready until the following week. The town council had promised temporary accommodations until then. With her letter of appointment clutched in one hand and her trunk handle in the other, Elizabeth made her way toward the only establishment that appeared to offer lodging, a 2-story building with a sign proclaiming it, "The Cactus Rose Inn." The innkeeper, a corpulent man named Silas Murphy, barely looked up from his ledger when she entered. The lobby was warm at least, with a fire crackling in the stone hearth. 2 men in dusty clothes sat in chairs nearby, their spurs jingling softly as they shifted. "Excuse me, sir," Elizabeth said, approaching the desk. "I require a room for the night. I'm the new schoolteacher." Murphy's eyes flicked up, regarding her without interest. "Teacher, eh? Thought you weren't due till next week." "The stagecoach schedule required me to arrive early." "I have a letter from the town council stating arrangements would be made." Murphy snorted. "Council don't run my inn, miss. I'm full-up trail crews in town, plus some cattle buyers from Tucson." "But surely you must have something available," Elizabeth insisted, feeling panic rising. Night had fallen and she knew no one in Casa Grande. "Ain't got nothing proper for a lady," he said, turning a page in his ledger with deliberate slowness. "Unless—" "Yes," hope flickered. "Got the stable out back, clean hay in the loft." 5 cents, same as for the trail hands who can't afford a proper room. Elizabeth's cheeks flushed with indignation. "Sir, I am a respectable woman. I cannot possibly take it or leave it, miss. Town ain't got nowhere else, less you fancy the saloon." His mouth curved in an unpleasant smile. "Though I don't reckon they rent rooms for sleeping, if you take my meaning." The door opened behind her, bringing with it a gust of cold air and the jingle of spurs. Elizabeth turned to see a tall man stomping snow from his boots. His face was partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, but she could see he was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 30, with a strong jaw darkened by stubble. "Evening, Lucas," Murphy called out. "Your room's ready. Number 4, upstairs on the right." The newcomer nodded, then seemed to notice Elizabeth for the first time. His eyes, a startling blue against his sun-darkened skin, took in her travel-worn appearance and the frustration evident on her face. "Problem?" he asked, his voice low and rough as if unused to speaking. "No problem," Murphy answered before Elizabeth could speak. "Just explaining to the lady teacher that I ain't got proper rooms for her kind tonight. Offered her the stable loft best I can do." The man called Lucas frowned, his gaze shifting from Elizabeth to Murphy and back again. "It's below freezing tonight." "Hay's warm enough," Murphy replied with a shrug. "Better than nothing." "Unacceptable," Elizabeth said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "I was promised accommodations. I'll speak to the council first thing tomorrow. Won't help you tonight, will it?" Murphy smirked. Lucas Calloway had spent the better part of 2 weeks on the trail with nothing but his horse and the endless Arizona sky for company. The prospect of a real bed and hot bath had been all that kept him going through the last freezing miles. Yet something in the woman's dignified bearing despite her obvious distress stirred something long dormant in him. "She can have my room," he said abruptly. 3 heads turned toward him in surprise. "What's that, Calloway?" Murphy asked. "The lady can have my room. I'll take the stable." Lucas removed his hat, revealing dark hair that curled slightly at the ends. "That is, if it suits the lady." Elizabeth stared, uncertain how to respond to this unexpected gallantry. "I couldn't possibly. I've slept worse places," Lucas interrupted. "And I've spent more nights under the stars than in proper beds anyway." His expression softened slightly as he addressed her directly. "No offense intended, madam, but you look like you need a real bed more than I do tonight." "That's mighty generous of you, Calloway," Murphy said, not bothering to hide his amusement. "Room still costs the same." Lucas nodded. "Expected as much." He turned to Elizabeth. "Madam, it's your decision." Elizabeth hesitated. Accepting felt improper, taking a stranger's room while he slept in a stable, yet the alternative was worse. Her eyes met his, searching for any hint of impropriety, but found only sincerity. "Thank you, Mr. Calloway. I accept your kind offer, though I insist on paying for my own lodging." Lucas shook his head. "Already paid for the night. Consider it a welcome to Casa Grande." Murphy snorted but pushed the key across the counter. "Room 4 it is, then. Calloway, stables 5 cents extra." Lucas dropped the coins without comment, then reached for Elizabeth's trunk. "Allow me, Miss Sutton, Elizabeth Sutton, Lucas Calloway," he replied with a slight nod. "Pleasure to make your acquaintance." As they climbed the narrow stairs, Elizabeth found herself studying her benefactor. His movements were economical and purposeful, his posture betraying none of the weariness that must have accompanied days on the trail. His clothes, while dust-covered, were of good quality, a heavy wool coat over a flannel shirt, denim pants tucked into well-worn boots. "Here we are," he said, stopping at room 4. He unlocked the door and placed her trunk inside. The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, washstand, and small window overlooking the street. "Mr. Calloway, I truly appreciate this kindness," Elizabeth said. "I will make certain to speak with the town council tomorrow about proper arrangements." "No need to mention my part in it," he said. "Murphy's always been tight with rooms when he can get away with it." "Are you certain you'll be comfortable in the stable?" she asked, genuine concern in her voice. A faint smile touched his lips. "Like I said, I've had worse. Good night, Miss Sutton." Before she could respond, he tipped his hat and was gone, his footsteps fading down the stairs. Elizabeth closed the door, leaning against it as exhaustion washed over her. The room was modest but infinitely preferable to a stable loft. She crossed to the window and looked down at the street below. A moment later, she saw Lucas cross to the stable, his tall figure briefly illuminated by the light from the inn before disappearing into the darkness. An unexpected warmth bloomed in her chest. Perhaps Casa Grande would offer more than she had anticipated. Lucas made his way to the stable, the cold already seeping through his coat now that he was outside again. He didn't regret giving up his room. The woman clearly needed it more, but his body ached for rest after 2 weeks of hard riding. The stable was warmer than outside, the body heat from half a dozen horses creating a pocket of relative comfort. He nodded to his own mount, a sturdy bay gelding named Rusty, who nickered in recognition. Lucas patted the horse's neck and set about making a place to sleep in an empty stall. "Hope you appreciate the company, old friend," he murmured as he spread his bedroll on fresh hay. "Might be the last quiet night we get for a while." As he settled down, his thoughts drifted to the schoolteacher. Elizabeth Sutton had the look of the East about her, refined despite her travel-worn appearance, with an education evident in her speech. Her eyes had been what struck him most intelligent and determined, with a flash of fire when Murphy had suggested the stable. Not the usual sort to venture to a place like Casa Grande. Lucas pulled his blanket tighter around himself. Tomorrow he'd return to his real purpose in town, checking on the small ranch he'd purchased 6 months ago, currently being managed by his foreman while Lucas finished business in Tucson. Teaching his neighbor's children to read over the years had shown him the power of education. Having a proper school teacher in town would benefit everyone, especially the children who deserved better than he'd had growing up. With the familiar sounds of horses shifting and snorting around him, Lucas drifted into sleep, the image of intelligent hazel eyes following him into his dreams. Dawn came early, pale light filtering through cracks in the stable walls. Lucas woke with the practiced alertness of a man accustomed to danger, his hand instinctively moving to the revolver beside his bedroll before relaxing as he remembered where he was. The stable was peaceful, filled only with the soft sounds of horses greeting the morning. He rose stiffly, brushing hay from his clothes. After taking care of his personal needs and checking on Rusty, Lucas made his way toward the inn's kitchen. The cook, a cheerful Mexican woman named Rosa, had always been friendly to him on previous stays. "Buenos dias, Señor Calloway," Rosa called when he appeared at the back door. "I hear you give your room to the new maestra. Very gentlemanly." News traveled fast in Casa Grande. "Morning, Rosa." "Any chance of coffee?" "She simper coffee for you." She poured him a steaming cup. "And breakfast too. You look hungry." "Obliged," Lucas said, accepting the cup gratefully. He settled at the small table in the corner of the kitchen, content to watch Rosa work as the warmth seeped back into his bones. The back door opened again, and Elizabeth Sutton entered, looking considerably refreshed from the night before. Her chestnut hair was neatly arranged, and her navy blue traveling dress, while simple, was elegant. She stopped short upon seeing Lucas. "Mr. Calloway, I was hoping to find you." Lucas stood, suddenly aware of his rumpled appearance. "Miss Sutton, trust you slept well." "Better than I had any right to, thanks to you." She approached with a smile. "I've come to thank you properly and to insist you take your room back tonight." "No need for either," he replied. "I'm heading to my ranch today. Won't be needing town lodgings. You have a ranch near Casa Grande." Rosa intervened, placing a plate of eggs and bacon before Lucas. "Señor Calloway has the old Jensen place about 5 miles east, very nice with the creek running through it." She turned to Elizabeth. "Breakfast, señorita? You are too thin." "Thank you, that would be lovely," Elizabeth replied warmly. Lucas gestured to the chair across from him. "Please join me, unless it's improper." "I think we're well past concerns of propriety after you gave up your bed," she said with a slight laugh, taking the seat. "Besides, this is hardly Boston." "How long were you in Boston?" Lucas asked between bites. "All my life, until now. I taught at a girls' school there for 2 years after finishing my education." Her expression grew more serious. "When my parents passed last year, there was little to keep me." The advertisement for a teacher in Arizona Territory seemed providential. "I'm sorry about your parents. Thank you." She accepted the coffee Rosa brought. "What about you, Mr. Calloway? Are you originally from Arizona?" Lucas shook his head. "Texas originally, came west after the war. Worked cattle drives, did some scouting for the Army. Saved enough to buy the Jensen place last year." "You fought in the war?" she asked carefully. "Confederacy," he acknowledged, watching her reaction. "I was young and foolish. 17 when I enlisted in 63. Saw enough to know better by the end." Elizabeth nodded thoughtfully. Many young men on both sides found themselves in similar circumstances. Her diplomatic response impressed him. Many Easterners, especially from Boston, held strong opinions about former Confederate soldiers. "The war's behind us now," Lucas said. "Out here, a man is judged by what he does today, not what uniform he might have worn." "A wise perspective," she agreed. "And what do you do today, Mr. Calloway, besides rescuing schoolteachers from inhospitable innkeepers?" The question coaxed a rare smile from him. "Cattle, mostly. Small operation compared to some, but it's growing. Good water on my land, which makes all the difference out here." Their conversation continued through breakfast, moving easily from topic to topic. Lucas found himself speaking more than he had in months, drawn out by Elizabeth's genuine interest and intelligent questions. She had a quick wit that surprised him, and a forthright manner refreshing after the circumspect communications he was accustomed to. "I should find the mayor this morning," Elizabeth said eventually. "Apparently my accommodations were to be arranged at the Walker boarding house, but Mrs. Walker is visiting her sister in Tucson until next week." "That explains it," Lucas nodded. "Town council likely thought they had more time before you arrived. Nevertheless, I cannot impose on your generosity again, nor do I intend to sleep in Mr. Murphy's stable." "Mayor Chapman has a spare room sometimes," Lucas suggested. "Or there's Widow Hollister on Pine Street. She's taken in boarders before. Thank you for the suggestions." Elizabeth smiled, then hesitated. "Mr. Calloway, might I ask why you helped me last night? We were strangers, after all." Lucas considered the question. "My mother taught me better than to let a lady sleep in a stable while I took a proper bed," he said simply. "Besides, Murphy was being deliberately difficult, never cared for men who use their position to discomfort others." "Well, whatever your reasons, I'm grateful." She rose from the table. "I hope our paths cross again, Mr. Calloway. In a town this size, that's almost certain, Miss Sutton." Lucas stood as well. "I wish you luck with your teaching position." "Thank you." She extended her hand, which he took briefly. Her skin was soft, but her grip firm, a woman comfortable with her own strength. As she left, Lucas found himself watching her departure longer than was strictly necessary. Rosa's knowing smile when he turned back to his coffee only confirmed what he already suspected. The new schoolteacher had caught his interest in a way no woman had in a very long time. Elizabeth spent the morning meeting with Mayor Chapman, a round-faced man with a perpetual look of mild surprise, who apologized profusely for the accommodation mix-up. By midday, she had secured temporary lodging with Widow Hollister, a stern but kind woman in her 60s who had a small room to let above her millinery shop. "It ain't fancy," Mrs. Hollister warned as she showed Elizabeth the room, "but it's clean and warm." "It's perfect," Elizabeth assured her. The room was indeed small, with just enough space for a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and a small table, but it was neat and had a window that caught the afternoon sun. $3 a week includes breakfast," Mrs. Hollister said firmly. "Dinner's another 50 cents daily if you want it. I don't serve lunch on account of the shop." "That's more than fair," Elizabeth replied, calculating her modest savings. The teaching position paid $25 a month, not generous, but enough to live on in a frontier town if she was careful. After settling her belongings, Elizabeth set out to explore Casa Grande. The town was larger than she'd initially thought, with a central business district consisting of a general store, bank, 2 saloons, the Cactus Rose Inn, a barber shop, and various other establishments. Side streets revealed modest homes, a small church, and finally, the schoolhouse. The building stood at the end of Pine Street, a simple one-room structure with a bell tower. It appeared newly whitewashed, though the steps needed repair. Elizabeth tried the door and found it unlocked. Inside was a single large room with rows of wooden desks, a pot-bellied stove, and a teacher's desk at the front. Bookshelves lined one wall, though they were only half filled. A blackboard covered most of the front wall. Elizabeth walked slowly to the teacher's desk, trailing her fingers along the smooth wooden surface. This was hers now, her domain, her responsibility. According to Mayor Chapman, 27 children were enrolled, ranging in age from 6 to 16, though attendance was sporadic, especially during planting and harvest seasons. "It ain't much, but it's ours," a voice said from the doorway. Elizabeth turned to see a woman in her 30s, a young girl clutching her skirts. "Hello," she greeted them. "I'm Elizabeth Sutton, the new teacher." "Martha Williams," the woman replied with a warm smile. "This here's my daughter, Emma. She's 8 and smart as a whip, though she's shy with strangers." Elizabeth crouched to the child's level. "Hello, Emma. I'm very pleased to meet you." The girl peeked out from behind her mother but said nothing. "Emma's been counting the days till school starts again," Martha explained. "My husband Ben's on the town council. He mentioned you arrived early, so I thought I'd come introduce myself." She looked around the schoolhouse. "We're all mighty grateful to have a proper teacher. Last one left in November, got married to a rancher from Prescott." "I look forward to meeting everyone," Elizabeth said. "I understand classes begin next Monday." "That's right. Gives you time to settle in." Martha hesitated. "I heard about the trouble at the inn last night. Murphy's always been a difficult sort. But folks around here are mostly decent, Miss Sutton. Don't judge us all by him." "I wouldn't dream of it," Elizabeth assured her. "Everyone else has been very welcoming." "Lucas Calloway giving up his room for you has got the town talking," Martha said with a knowing smile. "Not many men would do that." "Mr. Calloway was very kind," Elizabeth replied, striving for a neutral tone despite the warmth that rose to her cheeks at the mention of his name. Martha's smile widened. "He's a good man, though not one for socializing much. Keeps to himself mostly. Runs that ranch of his and comes to town for supplies every few weeks." She adjusted her shawl. "Well, we should let you get on. The ladies' auxiliary meets Thursdays at the church. We'd be pleased to have you join us." "Thank you, I'd like that." After Martha and Emma departed, Elizabeth spent another hour examining the schoolbooks and making notes on what supplies she would need. The afternoon sun was beginning to fade when she finally locked up and headed back toward town. As she walked down Pine Street, a commotion ahead caught her attention. A group had gathered outside the general store, voices raised in argument. Elizabeth approached cautiously, curious despite herself. "You telling me my money ain't good enough, Parker?" A man was shouting, his words slightly slurred. "I'm saying you're drunk again, Harlan, and I want you off my porch," replied who Elizabeth presumed was Mr. Parker, the storekeeper. "I got a right to shop same as anybody. Not when you're liquored up and looking for trouble. Come back tomorrow when you're sober." The drunk man, Harlan, swayed on his feet, his face contorted with anger. "You uppity son of a—" "That's enough, Harlan." The new voice cut through the tension, quiet but carrying authority. Lucas Calloway stood at the edge of the gathering, his posture relaxed but alert. He'd cleaned up since breakfast, Elizabeth noticed, though his clothes were still those of a working rancher rather than a town gentleman. Harlan spun toward the newcomer, nearly losing his balance in the process. "Stay out of this, Calloway, ain't your business." "Making it my business," Lucas replied evenly. "You're causing a scene. Ladies present." His eyes flicked briefly to Elizabeth, acknowledging her presence before returning to Harlan. The drunk man followed Lucas's gaze, noticing Elizabeth for the first time. Something in her expression, perhaps the schoolteacher's natural authority that had cowed many a rowdy student, seemed to penetrate his alcohol-fogged mind. "Didn't see you there, madam," he mumbled, suddenly abashed. "No offense intended." "Perhaps you should head home, Mr. Harlan," Elizabeth suggested calmly. "As Mr. Parker says, you can return tomorrow." The tension drained from the situation as quickly as it had built. Harlan muttered something unintelligible but stumbled away from the store. The small crowd dispersed, the entertainment over. Lucas approached Elizabeth as Parker returned to his store. "Miss Sutton, settling in all right?" "Yes, thank you. I've secured a room at Mrs. Hollister's and visited the schoolhouse." "Good. Hollister's a fair landlady." He glanced down the street where Harlan was still visible, weaving his way toward the edge of town. "Sorry about that. Harlan's harmless mostly, but liquor brings out the worst in him." "You handled it well," Elizabeth observed, "without violence." "Violence is rarely the answer, despite what dime novels might suggest about the West." A faint smile touched his lips. "Though I admit it's occasionally necessary." "Have you been in Casa Grande long, Mr. Calloway?" "About a year with the ranch. Passed through a few times before that." He hesitated. "I was actually heading to Parker's for supplies. May I walk with you if you're going that direction?" "I'd welcome the company," Elizabeth replied, surprised by how much she meant it. They walked side by side, Lucas shortening his stride to match hers. Elizabeth was aware of the curious glances from townspeople they passed, but Lucas seemed oblivious or indifferent to the attention. "I understand you've met Mrs. Williams and her daughter," Lucas commented. "Word travels quickly here," Elizabeth said with a smile. "Small towns," he shrugged. "No secrets, though plenty of speculation. Martha's husband Ben is a good man, solid on the council." She mentioned the ladies' auxiliary. "Do you think I should join?" Lucas considered the question seriously. "Might be wise. Easiest way to become part of the community. Though I reckon they'll gossip something fierce." "I'm quite used to that from Boston," Elizabeth laughed. "Teachers are always subject to scrutiny." They reached the general store, where Parker greeted them warmly. While Lucas conducted his business, Elizabeth browsed the shelves, making mental notes of what was available. Casa Grande's general store was better stocked than she'd expected, though certain items she'd taken for granted in Boston were conspicuously absent. When Lucas had completed his purchases, he turned to Elizabeth. "I should be getting back to the ranch before dark. It was a pleasure seeing you again, Miss Sutton." "Likewise, Mr. Calloway." She hesitated, then added, "Will you be in town for Sunday services?" "I understand that's when many of the outlying families come in." "I try to make it when I can," he replied, something flickering in his eyes she couldn't quite interpret. "Will you be attending?" "Yes. I think it important to meet as many families as possible before school begins." He nodded. "Sensible approach. Well, good day to you, Miss Sutton." As he left, Elizabeth noticed Parker watching with undisguised interest. "Known Lucas long, Miss Sutton?" the storekeeper asked. "We only met yesterday," she replied, "when he kindly offered me his room at the inn." Parker said, clearly intrigued. "Not like Calloway to be so sociable, keeps to himself mostly. Good customer, pays promptly but not one for chit-chat." "Perhaps he was simply being neighborly," Elizabeth suggested, uncomfortable with the implied speculation. "Perhaps," Parker agreed, though his tone suggested he thought otherwise. "He's well respected hereabouts, worked hard for that ranch of his. No family that anyone knows of, though plenty of the local girls have tried to catch his eye." Elizabeth made a noncommittal noise, unwilling to encourage gossip yet curiously pleased by this information. "Mr. Parker, I was wondering if you carry school books or slates. I'm taking inventory of what I'll need for classes." The change of subject worked, and Parker eagerly showed her his educational supplies. By the time Elizabeth left the store, the conversation had shifted entirely to school matters, but her thoughts kept returning to Lucas Calloway and the brief connection she'd felt during their conversations. Lucas rode back to his ranch, his thoughts similarly preoccupied with the new schoolteacher. There was something about Elizabeth Sutton that intrigued him, her intelligence, certainly, but also the courage it must have taken to leave everything familiar and journey alone to the Arizona territory. Not many women would undertake such a venture, especially one clearly raised in genteel circumstances. The ranch came into view as he crested a small rise, a modest but well-maintained adobe house. A barn, corral, and bunkhouse, surrounded by grazing land that stretched for acres in all directions. It wasn't much compared to the giant cattle operations in Texas, but it was his, earned through years of hard work and careful saving. His foreman, Miguel Ortiz, emerged from the barn as Lucas approached. "Boss, good to see you back. Everything go well in Tucson?" "Well enough," Lucas dismounted, handing the reins to Miguel. "Cattle prices are holding steady. We should do fine at the spring drive if we can avoid disease and Indian trouble." "No problems here while you were gone," Miguel assured him. "Though Jenkins rode through yesterday saying some of the Walton outfit were asking about our water rights again." Lucas frowned. The neighboring Walton ranch was larger and better established, run by Howard Walton, a man whose ambition was matched only by his ruthlessness. The creek that ran through Lucas's property had been a point of contention since he'd purchased the land. "Legal rights are clear," Lucas said. "That creek's on my property." But Walton never cared much for legal when he wants something." Miguel shrugged expressively. "Just thought you should know. Appreciate it. Any other news?" As they walked toward the house, Miguel filled him in on ranch matters, cattle counts, fence repairs, supplies needed. It wasn't until they were inside that Miguel said casually, "Heard in town that Casa Grande has a new schoolteacher." "A lady from back east." Lucas nodded, busying himself with unpacking his saddlebags. "Met her. Seems capable." Miguel raised an eyebrow. "Just capable. Pablo's wife Rosa says you gave up your room for her at the inn." "Murphy was trying to make her sleep in the stable," Lucas replied, uncomfortable with Miguel's knowing look. "Wasn't right." "Very gallant, Jeef," Miguel grinned. "Rosa says she's pretty too." "Don't you have work to do?" Lucas asked pointedly, though without real annoyance. He'd known Miguel for 5 years, since they'd worked together on a cattle drive from Texas. The man was more friend than employee and took certain liberties accordingly. Miguel's grin widened. "Always work, but not too much work to notice when the boss takes interest in a lady." "It's not like that," Lucas protested. "Just being neighborly, if you say so." Miguel headed for the door, then paused. "Though Rosa also mentioned that Mrs. Williams is already planning to invite the new teacher to Sunday dinner after church. Her niece Abigail will be visiting from Phoenix." Lucas understood the implication immediately. Abigail Williams was a pretty, lively girl of 20 who had made her interest in Lucas obvious during previous visits. Martha had not so subtly tried to encourage a match before. "Good for them," Lucas said neutrally. "Miss Sutton should meet local families." Miguel just shook his head, muttering something in Spanish about stubborn Americans as he left. Alone in his house, Lucas found his thoughts returning to Elizabeth despite his attempts to focus on ranch business. There was no denying his attraction to her, but he had learned long ago that people from different worlds rarely found lasting happiness together. Elizabeth Sutton was educated, cultured, from Boston society. He was a former Confederate soldier turned rancher, with calloused hands and limited formal education. Better to maintain a neighborly distance, he decided. Casa Grande needed a good teacher, and his personal feelings shouldn't complicate her position in the community. Still, as he prepared for bed that night, Lucas found himself looking forward to Sunday services more eagerly than he had in months. The remainder of the week passed quickly for Elizabeth. She spent her days organizing the schoolhouse, meeting town residents, and preparing lessons. Mrs. Hollister proved to be an excellent landlady, providing hearty meals and introducing Elizabeth to key community members who visited the millinery shop. By Sunday morning, Elizabeth felt she had at least a basic understanding of Casa Grande's social landscape. The town had its share of hardworking families, along with the usual frontier characters: miners, cowboys, drifters, and entrepreneurs seeking opportunity in the growing territory. She dressed carefully for church in her best navy blue dress with white collar and cuffs. The building was small but well-maintained, with neat wooden pews and simple stained glass windows. As people began to arrive, Elizabeth stood near the entrance with Mayor Chapman and his wife, who had taken it upon themselves to make introductions. Families from outlying farms and ranches filled the church gradually. Elizabeth smiled and greeted each one, making special note of children who would soon be her students. She was just beginning to wonder if Lucas would attend when she spotted him approaching from the direction of the livery stable. He was transformed from the working rancher she had met previously. His dark hair was neatly combed, and he wore a clean white shirt with a string tie, dark pants, and a well-brushed black coat. Only his sun-darkened skin and the leather holster visible beneath his coat marked him as different from any Eastern gentleman. Lucas nodded to several people as he approached, but seemed to be heading directly toward Elizabeth. Her heart quickened inexplicably as he drew near. "Good morning, Miss Sutton," he said, removing his hat. "You're looking well. Casa Grande agrees with you." "Good morning, Mr. Calloway," she replied. "Thank you, I'm finding my bearings gradually." "Lucas." Martha Williams appeared beside them, her husband and daughter in tow. "So glad you made it to services today. Have you formally met our new teacher?" "We've been acquainted," Lucas confirmed with a slight smile. "Good to see you, Emma." Ben Williams shook Lucas's hand warmly. "Calloway, how's the ranch coming along? That bull you recommended is working out well." Martha beamed at Elizabeth. "We were hoping you might join us for Sunday dinner after services, Miss Sutton. Nothing fancy, but it would give you a chance to meet more folks informally." "That's very kind of you," Elizabeth accepted. "I'd be delighted." "Wonderful. Lucas, you'll come too, won't you?" Martha's tone was casual, but there was a gleam in her eye that reminded Elizabeth of Boston matrons plotting matches for their eligible daughters. Lucas hesitated. "Appreciate the invitation, but no excuses," Ben interrupted firmly. "Been too long since you joined us. Besides, my niece Abigail is visiting from Phoenix. She asked about you specifically." Elizabeth thought she detected a flicker of resignation cross Lucas's face before he nodded. "In that case, I'd be pleased to join you." The church bell rang, signaling the start of services, and they all moved inside. Somehow, Elizabeth found herself seated beside Lucas, with the Williams family on her other side. Throughout the service, she was acutely aware of his presence, the subtle scent of soap and leather, the way he sang hymns in a pleasant baritone, the respectful attention he paid to Reverend Miller's sermon. After the service concluded, they made their way to the Williams home, a comfortable two-story house on the edge of town. Elizabeth was immediately introduced to Abigail Williams, a pretty blonde girl whose face lit up noticeably when Lucas entered. "Mr. Calloway." "I was hoping you'd be here," Abigail said, rushing forward to greet him. "It's been ages since your last visit to Phoenix." "Miss Abigail," Lucas replied politely, "you're looking well. How are your parents thriving, though father works too hard as always?" She looped her arm through his with practiced familiarity. "You must tell me everything that's happened since Christmas. Has your herd grown? Did you add that north pasture you were considering?" Elizabeth watched as Abigail led Lucas away, noting the easy way the younger woman commanded his attention. She felt a surprising pang that she recognized as jealousy, though she had no right to such feelings toward a man she barely knew. "Don't mind Abigail," Martha said quietly beside her. "She's been sweet on Lucas since she was 16, though I'm not sure he returns the sentiment." "They seem well acquainted," Elizabeth observed neutrally. "Oh, Lucas has known our family for years. He helped Ben with some land disputes when he first arrived in the territory." Martha guided Elizabeth toward the dining room. "But between you and me, I think Lucas needs someone with more substance than my niece, charming though she is." The look Martha gave her left little doubt about who she might consider suitable, and Elizabeth felt her cheeks warm. "Mr. Calloway and I are barely acquainted," she protested softly. "Of course," Martha agreed, though her smile suggested otherwise. "Now tell me about your plans for the school. Ben says the council has allocated funds for new books." Dinner was a lively affair, with 12 people crowded around the Williams dining table. Elizabeth found herself seated between Ben Williams and an elderly rancher named Joseph Harmon, with Lucas and Abigail directly across from her. Throughout the meal, she noticed Lucas's eyes occasionally meeting hers during conversation, a silent acknowledgement that somehow felt significant. "Miss Sutton," Mr. Harmon addressed her, "my grandchildren will be attending your school, 3 of them ages 8, 10, and 12. Their parents work our ranch, but education's important to our family." "I'm glad to hear it," Elizabeth replied warmly. "Not all frontier families prioritize schooling. Been too long without proper learning in these parts," the old man agreed. "My late wife was a teacher back in Missouri. Always said education was what separated civilization from barbarism." "A wise woman," Elizabeth smiled. "I hope to instill that same appreciation in my students." "You'll have your work cut out for you," Ben Williams commented. "Some of these ranch children have never set foot in a schoolroom." The conversation turned to education more broadly, with Elizabeth fielding questions about her approach to teaching and curriculum. She was grateful for the years of experience that allowed her to speak confidently on these matters. "What about older students?" Lucas asked suddenly. "Those who might have missed schooling entirely." All eyes turned to him, and Elizabeth noticed a rare intensity in his expression. "There are methods for adult education," she replied thoughtfully. "Evening classes, perhaps. Why do you ask?" "Some of my ranch hands," Lucas said. "Good men, hard workers, but never had the opportunity to learn reading or figures beyond the basics. Would benefit them to improve those skills." "I'd be happy to arrange something," Elizabeth offered, intrigued by his concern for his workers. "Perhaps 2 evenings a week, once I've established the regular school schedule." "That's mighty generous of you, Miss Sutton," Ben said approvingly. "Teachers in the past have barely managed the day school, let alone extras." "Education should be available to all who seek it," Elizabeth replied simply. Her gaze met Lucas's again, and the respect she saw there warmed her more than any formal compliment could have. After dinner, the party moved to the parlor for coffee. Elizabeth found herself by the window, momentarily alone as Martha arranged musical entertainment. Lucas approached, 2 cups in hand. "Coffee," he offered, extending one to her. "Thank you." Their fingers brushed as she accepted the cup, sending an unexpected spark through her. "Your question about adult education, was it merely theoretical?" Lucas shook his head. "Miguel, my foreman, reads some but struggles with writing. 2 of my other hands can barely sign their names. Good men who deserve better opportunities." "That's admirable, your concern for them." "Self-interest partly," he admitted with a slight smile. "Better educated workers make for a better run ranch, but mostly—" He hesitated. "I know what it's like, wanting knowledge and finding it just out of reach. Elizabeth studied him with new interest. Did you have limited schooling yourself? 6 years total, in a one-room schoolhouse not unlike Casa Grande's. War interrupted. After that, I educated myself as best I could. Books when I could get them, newspapers, almanacs. He looked slightly embarrassed by the admission. Always felt the lack. Yet you speak as well as any educated man I know, Elizabeth observed. Kind of you to say. His gaze shifted to where Abigail was arranging sheet music at the piano. I should probably, Lucas, Abigail called, confirming his thought. You must turn pages for me. I'm playing the chop-in piece you admired at Christmas. With an apologetic glance at Elizabeth, Lucas moved to join Abigail at the piano. Elizabeth watched their interaction, noting the younger woman's obvious attempts to engage Lucas's admiration. Yet she also noticed how his eyes occasionally sought hers across the room, even as he performed his duties as page turner. The afternoon concluded pleasantly, with Elizabeth having met several families whose children would attend her school. As the guests began to depart, Lucas approached her again. "May I escort you back to Mrs. Hollister's?" he asked quietly. "Thank you, but it's only a short walk," Elizabeth replied, conscious of Abigail watching them from across the room. "I insist," Lucas said. Sunday afternoons, some of the saloon crowd gets rowdy early. In that case, I accept. Elizabeth gathered her shawl, said her goodbyes to the Williams family, and stepped outside with Lucas. The afternoon was pleasant, with the winter sun providing warmth without the scorching heat Arizona was known for. They walked in companionable silence for a moment before Elizabeth spoke. "Miss Williams seems quite taken with you." Lucas's expression remained neutral. "Abigail is a nice girl. Known her since she was a child." "Just a nice girl," Elizabeth pressed, then immediately regretted her boldness. "Forgive me, that's not my business." "No offense taken," Lucas assured her. "Abigail deserves someone who can appreciate her accomplishments: piano playing, French watercolors." "That's not me." "You sell yourself short, Mr. Calloway." "Lucas, please, and I'm realistic. I'm a rancher with calloused hands and practical concerns. Abigail would wither on my ranch within a month." He glanced at Elizabeth. "And you, did you leave anyone special in Boston?" "No," she answered honestly. "There were suitors, but none that." She trailed off, unsure how to explain that the men her parents had considered suitable had all seemed interchangeable, lacking the vitality she craved. None that made your heart beat faster. Lucas suggested, surprising her with his perception. "Exactly," Elizabeth admitted. "My parents hoped I would marry a banker or lawyer, someone established in Boston society, but I could never quite see myself in that life. So you chose the Arizona territory instead. Quite a change." "I needed something different after they passed. A place where I could be useful, where my work would matter directly." She smiled. "Teaching 27 children of all ages in one room will certainly be different from the structured classes of Miss Porter's school for girls." They reached Mrs. Hollister's shop, stopping at the side entrance that led to her lodgings. Elizabeth turned to face Lucas, suddenly reluctant for their conversation to end. "Thank you for escorting me," she said. "My pleasure." He hesitated, then added, "If you're serious about those evening classes, I'd be happy to help arrange a suitable space at the ranch. Maybe once a week to start, if that wouldn't be too taxing alongside your regular duties." "I'd like that," Elizabeth replied, touched by his continued interest in education for his workers. "Perhaps we could discuss the details later this week. I could visit the ranch, see what might work best." Something flickered in Lucas's eyes, surprise, perhaps, or pleasure. "I'd welcome that." Thursday afternoon. "I could send Miguel with the wagon if that suits you." "Thursday would be perfect. I have the ladies' auxiliary meeting in the morning, but I'm free after noon." Lucas nodded, a rare full smile transforming his features. Until Thursday, then. He tipped his hat and departed, leaving Elizabeth with a curious lightness in her chest and the sense that something significant had begun, though she couldn't have named it precisely. The next 3 days passed in a flurry of preparation, as Elizabeth finalized her plans for the school's opening the following Monday. She organized books, prepared lesson plans for multiple grade levels, and continued meeting Casa Grande residents. Several mothers brought their children to meet her in advance, and Elizabeth was pleased to find most of the youngsters bright and eager, if somewhat behind in formal education. Thursday morning found her at the church for the ladies' auxiliary meeting, where she was warmly welcomed by the dozen women who formed the backbone of Casa Grande's social structure. They discussed various charitable projects, including providing supplies for poorer students, before turning their attention to upcoming social events. "The Founders' Day dance is in 3 weeks," announced Mrs. Chapman, the mayor's wife. "We'll need volunteers for decorating and refreshments." "Miss Sutton should help with the planning committee," suggested Martha Williams. "Best way to meet everyone in the community." Elizabeth agreed readily, though she noticed several knowing glances exchanged among the women. It was clear her interactions with Lucas Calloway had become a subject of interest. This was confirmed when Martha approached her after the meeting adjourned. "Lucas is sending his wagon for you this afternoon, I hear." "Yes," Elizabeth acknowledged. "We're discussing the possibility of evening classes for his ranch hands." Martha's eyes twinkled. "Very educational, I'm sure. Lucas has never invited a lady to his ranch before, you know, not even Abigail, despite her rather obvious hints." "It's purely professional," Elizabeth insisted, though her heartbeat quickened at this information. "Of course," Martha agreed with a knowing smile. "Just like his giving up his room at the inn was purely neighborly." Lucas Calloway has always been kind, but never particularly attentive to newcomers before now. Before Elizabeth could formulate a response, Miguel Ortiz appeared at the church door, removing his hat respectfully as he entered. "Miss Sutton, I'm Miguel, Mr. Calloway's foreman. He sent me with the wagon, as arranged." "Thank you, Mr. Ortiz. I'll be right there." Elizabeth gathered her belongings, bidding farewell to Martha and the other ladies, acutely aware of their interested gazes following her departure. Miguel helped her into the wagon, a sturdy farm vehicle with a bench seat worn smooth from use. "Beautiful day for a drive, no?" he commented as they set off. 5 miles to the ranch, but good road most of the way. "Have you worked for Mr. Calloway long?" Elizabeth asked, genuinely curious about Lucas's operation. 5 years now. Since Texas," Miguel replied. "He is a good boss, fair man, pays better than most ranchers and treats his men with respect. He mentioned some of your colleagues might benefit from education." Miguel nodded. "She, including me, I read some, but writing." He shrugged expressively. "Never had proper teaching. The boss, he helps when he can, but he is busy with the ranch." "He seems to value education highly," Elizabeth observed. "Lucas is always reading when he has time. Has books in his house, history, science, poetry even." Miguel gave her a sidelong glance. "He does not show this side to many people." Elizabeth absorbed this information thoughtfully as they continued toward the ranch. The landscape was starkly beautiful, rolling grasslands interspersed with mesquite and prickly pear cactus, set against distant purple mountains. A creek appeared, winding through the property, its banks lined with cottonwoods just beginning to show spring green. "There it is," Miguel pointed ahead. Calloway Ranch. Elizabeth's first impression was of orderliness. Unlike some frontier establishments she'd seen, everything about Lucas's ranch spoke of careful planning and maintenance. The main house was adobe with a wooden porch spanning the front, flanked by several outbuildings including a large barn, bunkhouse, and corrals. Cattle grazed in the distance, and several horses occupied the nearest paddock. Lucas emerged from the barn as they approached, wiping his hands on a cloth. He wore work clothes denims, a blue cotton shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and boots but had clearly made an effort to clean up. His hair was damp, as if freshly washed. "Miss Sutton," he greeted her, helping her down from the wagon. "Welcome to my home." "Thank you for inviting me," Elizabeth replied, suddenly nervous despite herself. "Your ranch is impressive." "Work in progress," Lucas said modestly, "but it's coming along." "Would you like a tour before we discuss the education plans?" "I'd enjoy that very much." Lucas offered his arm, which she took after only a moment's hesitation. The contact felt natural somehow, as if they'd known each other far longer than the week since their first meeting. "Miguel, could you let Rosa know we'll have tea in about an hour?" Lucas requested. "She, Jeef." Miguel tipped his hat to Elizabeth with a smile that suggested he found the situation amusing before leading the wagon toward the barn. Lucas showed Elizabeth around the immediate ranch buildings, first the barn with its neat stalls and tack room, the smokehouse, the small blacksmith's forge where basic repairs were handled. Everywhere she looked, Elizabeth saw evidence of careful stewardship and attention to detail. "The bunkhouse is there," Lucas pointed to a long, low building. "Currently houses 5 men, Miguel, 2 vaqueros named Carlos and Domingo, and 2 American cowboys, Jim and Frank. Jim can read fairly well but struggles with writing. Frank and Domingo are completely illiterate. Carlos knows his letters but not much more. And these are the men interested in education. All except Frank, who claims he's too old to learn, though he's only 35. Lucas's expression grew serious. "They're good men, Miss Sutton. Hard workers who deserve a chance to improve themselves if they wish." "I agree completely," Elizabeth assured him. "And please, if we're to work together on this project, you must call me Elizabeth." A smile touched his lips. "Elizabeth, then." They continued walking, crossing a small bridge over the creek toward a stand of cottonwoods. "This is my favorite spot on the property," Lucas admitted. "Peaceful, good place to think." Elizabeth could see why he valued it. The water gurgled pleasantly over smooth stones and the trees provided dappled shade. It was a natural oasis in the often harsh landscape. "You miss Boston?" Lucas asked unexpectedly. Elizabeth considered the question. "Certain aspects, the libraries, theaters, lectures. The convenience of city life, but not as much as I anticipated." She looked around at the wild beauty surrounding them. "There's something compelling about this place, a sense of possibility." "That's exactly it," Lucas agreed, his expression animated. "When I first came west after the war, that's what drew me, the openness, the chance to build something from nothing, to be judged by what you create rather than where you came from or which side you fought for." "It's freedom of a sort," Elizabeth nodded. "Though I imagine it comes with considerable challenges." "More than I expected," he acknowledged with a rueful smile. "Drought, harsh winters, disputes with neighbors over water and grazing rights, occasional trouble with raiders." He trailed off, then added, "But worth every hardship when I look at what we've built here." They reached the main house and Lucas led her onto the porch. "Not as grand as Eastern homes," he said, a touch of uncertainty in his voice. "It's lovely," Elizabeth replied honestly. The interior confirmed her impression of Lucas as an orderly, thoughtful man. The main room combined kitchen and living areas, with a large stone fireplace, sturdy wooden furniture, and as Miguel had mentioned, a bookshelf filled with volumes. Elizabeth was drawn to it immediately, scanning the titles with interest. Quite a collection for a frontier ranch, she observed, noting works of history, natural science, and indeed, poetry. Wordsworth, Keats, and Whitman, among others. Books travel well, Lucas said. Brought some from Texas, acquired others along the way. The Whitman was a Christmas gift from Martha Williams. She thought a fellow American poet might appeal to me, and does he? Very much. Though I confess some passages leave me puzzled. Elizabeth smiled. Perhaps we could discuss them sometime. I studied Whitman at school. A noise from the kitchen interrupted them as a middle-aged Mexican woman, presumably Rosa, entered with a tea tray. "Ah, you must be the teacher," she said warmly. "Welcome, señorita. I have made tea and some sweet bread." "Thank you, Rosa. This is Miss Elizabeth Sutton," Lucas introduced them. "Rosa's husband Pablo helps with the gardens and orchard. They live in the small house beyond the bunkhouse." "Pleasure to meet you," Elizabeth said. Rosa set the tray on the table, giving Lucas a look that Elizabeth couldn't quite interpret before excusing herself. Once they were seated with tea, the conversation returned to the proposed evening classes. "I thought perhaps Tuesday evenings might work," Elizabeth suggested. "It wouldn't interfere with your men's Sunday rest day or with church activities in town." "Tuesdays would be fine," Lucas agreed. "What about location? The bunkhouse has a table, but it's cramped. The main house here has more space, but—" he hesitated. "But it might seem improper for me to teach here regularly," Elizabeth finished, understanding his concern. Small-town propriety was a force to be reckoned with, and a single woman visiting a bachelor's home too frequently would certainly raise eyebrows. "Exactly. Though I'd be present, of course, and Rosa as well if needed." Elizabeth considered the problem. "What about the schoolhouse? It's equipped for teaching with proper desks and blackboard. Your men could ride in one evening a week." Lucas nodded slowly. "That could work. It's not too far, and they could take turns staying behind to watch the ranch." He smiled. "And it would avoid any potential for gossip. Though I fear that ship may have sailed," Elizabeth said lightly. "The ladies at the auxiliary meeting this morning seemed quite interested in my visit here today." Lucas winced. "I should have considered that. Small towns and their talk. I apologize if I've put you in an awkward position." "Not at all," Elizabeth assured him. "I've done nothing improper, nor have you. Besides, I've never been one to let gossip dictate my actions." "A refreshing attitude," Lucas replied, his expression warming. "Still, we should be mindful. Your position in the community is important, especially as the school teacher." They spent the next hour discussing specifics of the evening classes materials needed, appropriate lessons for adult learners of varying abilities, and scheduling. Throughout their conversation, Elizabeth found herself increasingly drawn to Lucas's intelligence and thoughtful approach to problems. When it was time for her to return to town, Lucas himself drove the wagon rather than sending Miguel. The late afternoon sun bathed the landscape in golden light as they traveled, making even the rugged terrain appear welcoming. "I've been thinking," Lucas said as they neared Casa Grande. "The Founders' Day dance is coming up in a few weeks. Would you consider attending with me? As friends, of course," he added quickly. "It would give you a chance to meet more families in a social setting." Elizabeth felt a flutter of pleasure at the invitation. "I'd like that very much," she replied, trying to keep her tone casual. "The ladies mentioned the dance this morning. Apparently I'm on the decorating committee." "Is that so?" Lucas chuckled. "Martha Williams is doing, I'd wager. She has a tendency to involve newcomers in every town activity." "She's been very welcoming," Elizabeth agreed, "though I suspect she had ulterior motives in inviting both of us to Sunday dinner." "Martha has been trying to marry me off for years," Lucas admitted with a rueful smile. "First to various widows, then to her niece once Abigail turned 18. And you've resisted all attempts. He glanced at her briefly. I've been focused on establishing the ranch. And he hesitated. I believe marriage should be based on more than convenience or surface attraction. A surprisingly romantic notion for a practical rancher, Elizabeth observed, her tone gently teasing. Perhaps I've read too much poetry, Lucas replied, a rare sparkle of humor in his eyes. They arrived at Mrs. Hollister's just as dusk was falling. Lucas helped Elizabeth down from the wagon, holding her hand perhaps a moment longer than strictly necessary. Thank you for coming to the ranch today, he said. Tuesday evening for the first class then, 7 o'clock at the schoolhouse. I'll be prepared, Elizabeth promised. And thank you for the invitation to the dance. Lucas tipped his hat, his expression warm. Until Tuesday, Elizabeth. As she watched him drive away, Elizabeth acknowledged the truth she had been avoiding. She was developing feelings for Lucas Calloway that went well beyond professional respect or friendship. The realization was both exhilarating and terrifying. Casa Grande was to be her home now, her place of employment and community. Romantic entanglements, especially with a man as prominent as Lucas, could complicate her position significantly if things went awry. Yet the connection between them felt undeniable, a pull as natural as gravity. As Elizabeth prepared for bed that night, she found herself looking forward to Tuesday evening with an anticipation that had little to do with teaching and everything to do with seeing Lucas again. The weekend brought final preparations for the school's opening, and Monday dawned clear and bright. Elizabeth arrived at the schoolhouse early, arranging books and writing a welcome message on the blackboard. By 8 o'clock, children began to arrive, some eager, others clearly reluctant, a few accompanied by parents wanting to meet the new teacher. The day was a whirlwind of assessments, introductions, and establishing routines. By the time the last student departed at 3 o'clock, Elizabeth was exhausted but exhilarated. The children had been more willing and capable than she dared hope, though their educational backgrounds varied wildly. Tuesday brought similar challenges and rewards, with the added anticipation of the evening class. Elizabeth stayed at the schoolhouse after dismissing her students, arranging simpler materials for the adult learners and preparing the stove to ward off the evening chill. Shortly before 7, she heard horses approaching. Looking out the window, she saw Lucas riding alongside Miguel and 3 other men she assumed were his ranch hands. They dismounted, tying their horses to the rail outside, and Lucas led them toward the schoolhouse. "Good evening, Miss Sutton," Lucas greeted her formally as they entered, clearly establishing a professional tone for his men's benefit. "Allow me to introduce Carlos Mendez, Domingo Vasquez, and Jim Peterson." Elizabeth welcomed them warmly, noting their varying degrees of nervousness. Jim, a weathered man in his 40s, seemed most at ease, while young Domingo looked as if he might bolt at any moment. "I'm very pleased you've chosen to improve your education," she told them. "Learning is a lifelong journey, and it's never too late to begin or continue that journey." Under her guidance, the men gradually relaxed. She assessed their abilities carefully, providing individual exercises appropriate to each level. Lucas sat at the back of the room, occasionally offering assistance but mostly observing with evident approval. By the end of the 2-hour session, all 3 men seemed genuinely engaged in the learning process. Elizabeth provided each with simple materials to practice with during the week, promising to build on their progress the following Tuesday. "That was remarkable," Lucas commented after his men had stepped outside to prepare for the ride back to the ranch. "Domingo hasn't spoken that much in the entire time he's worked for me. He's very bright," Elizabeth observed. "With regular instruction, he could advance quickly. Thanks to you." Lucas's expression was warm with admiration. "You have a gift for teaching, Elizabeth. It helps to have willing students." She began gathering her materials. "Will you join us each week, if you don't mind? I find I'm learning things myself, watching your methods." Their eyes met, and Elizabeth felt that now familiar flutter in her chest. The professional boundary they'd maintained during the lesson seemed to evaporate, leaving only two people drawn to each other in ways that transcended simple attraction. The moment was interrupted by Miguel calling from outside. "Boss, we should head back before it gets too dark." "Coming," Lucas called back. To Elizabeth he added, "May I escort you to Mrs. Hollister's first?" "Thank you, but you should get your men back to the ranch," she replied. "I have my lantern, and it's not far." Lucas hesitated, clearly reluctant to leave her. "Very well, but next week I'll arrange things differently. I don't like the idea of you walking alone after dark." His concern warmed her. "I'll be perfectly safe. Casa Grande has proven quite civilized so far." "Even civilized towns have their dangers," Lucas replied. He reached out briefly, touching her hand. "Until Sunday, then." "Sunday," she agreed, understanding he meant church services where they would see each other next. After Lucas and his men departed, Elizabeth remained at the schoolhouse a while longer, recording notes on each student's progress and planning the next lesson. The evening had gone even better than she'd hoped. Lucas's men were eager to learn, and the opportunity to work with adult students made a pleasant change from children's education. As she finally prepared to leave, Elizabeth heard a sound at the door. Expecting perhaps a parent with a question about the day school, she was surprised to find Howard Walton standing there. She'd met the neighboring rancher briefly after church the previous Sunday, a tall, imposing man in his 50s with iron gray hair and cold eyes. "Mr. Walton," she greeted him cautiously. "What brings you to the schoolhouse at this hour?" "Saw the light," he replied, his gaze sweeping the room. "Noticed Calloway and his men riding back toward his place. You holding special classes, Miss Sutton?" Something in his tone put Elizabeth on guard. "Adult education, yes. Several of Mr. Calloway's ranch hands are improving their reading and writing skills." Walton's mouth curved in what might have been intended as a smile but resembled a sneer. "Calloway always did have fancy ideas." "Educating cowboys waste of time if you ask me. Man needs strong arms and a good eye for cattle, not book learning." "I believe education benefits everyone, Mr. Walton," Elizabeth replied coolly. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I was just leaving." "I'll walk you back to town," Walton offered, though his tone made it sound more like a command than a courtesy. "Thank you, but that's not necessary." Elizabeth gathered her shawl and lantern. "Insist," Walton said, blocking the doorway slightly. "Not safe for a lady alone. Besides, wanted to talk to you about my grandchildren. 3 of them should be in your school, but their father, my son, is considering sending them to Phoenix instead for proper education." The implied criticism was clear, but Elizabeth refused to be provoked. "That's certainly his prerogative, though I assure you the education I provide is thorough." "I'm sure it is," Walton replied, stepping aside to let her pass but falling into step beside her as they headed toward town. "Question is whether associating too closely with certain elements is appropriate for a schoolteacher." Elizabeth stopped walking. "I beg your pardon. Small town, Miss Sutton. People talk. You spending time at Calloway's ranch, him giving up hotel rooms for you." Walton's expression was calculated. "Might give the wrong impression to respectable families like mine." Anger flared in Elizabeth, hot and immediate. "Mr. Walton, my personal associations are my own affair. Mr. Calloway has shown nothing but gentlemanly behavior and a commendable interest in his workers' education." "Just sharing friendly advice," Walton said, raising his hands in a placating gesture that did nothing to disguise the threat beneath his words. School board listens to influential citizens. Would hate to see a promising teacher's reputation compromised. Elizabeth drew herself up to her full height, meeting his gaze directly. I appreciate your concern, Mr. Walton, misplaced though it is. Now I can find my own way from here. Good evening. She walked away briskly, not looking back though she could feel his eyes following her, only when she reached the safety of Mrs. Hollister's did Elizabeth allow herself to tremble, both from anger and from the realization that her connection with Lucas had created an enemy, one apparently powerful enough to threaten her position. The encounter with Walton cast a shadow over Elizabeth's week, though she did her best not to let it affect her teaching. By Sunday, she had almost convinced herself that his comments were mere bluster, motivated by whatever dispute existed between him and Lucas, rather than any real intention to interfere with her employment. Church services provided a welcome distraction. Elizabeth found herself watching for Lucas with anticipation that turned to concern when the service began with no sign of him. It wasn't until the final hymn that the church door opened and Lucas slipped in at the back, his expression grim. When the congregation dispersed, Elizabeth made her way toward him, noting the tension in his posture and the shadows beneath his eyes suggesting sleepless nights. "Lucas," she greeted him. "I was beginning to think you wouldn't come." "Nearly didn't," he admitted. "Had trouble at the ranch last night. Someone cut a section of my fence bordering Walton's property. Lost about 20 head of cattle before we noticed." "That's terrible," Elizabeth said, immediately connecting this news with her encounter with Walton. "Do you think it was deliberate?" Lucas's jaw tightened. "No question. Clean cuts, not breaks. Walton's been trying to pressure me to sell since I bought the place. He wants the water rights to that creek." "Mr. Walton confronted me Tuesday night after your men left," Elizabeth told him. "He implied that my association with you might jeopardize my teaching position." Anger flashed in Lucas's eyes. "He had no right. This is between him and me. You shouldn't be involved." "I'm already involved, it seems." Elizabeth touched his arm briefly. "Lucas, if our friendship is causing problems, don't say it," he interrupted. "Walton doesn't get to dictate who either of us associates with. I won't let him threaten you." Their conversation was interrupted by Martha Williams, who approached with concern evident on her face. "Lucas, we heard about your cattle. That's the third incident this month, isn't it?" "Fourth," he corrected grimly. "First it was missing tools, then a broken windmill pump, then someone spooked my horses out of the north pasture. Now this." "You should speak to Sheriff Davis," Martha suggested. "Already have. He says there's no proof Walton's behind it." Lucas ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "We all know it's him, but proving it is another matter." "Come have dinner with us," Martha invited them both. "Ben might have some ideas." He dealt with Walton before over water rights to the town well. Lucas glanced at Elizabeth, who nodded her agreement. "Thank you, Martha. We'd be glad to come." Dinner at the Williams home was more subdued than the previous Sunday, with conversation centered on Lucas's troubles with Walton. Ben Williams confirmed that the older rancher had a reputation for underhanded tactics when he wanted something. "Problem is, he's careful," Ben explained. "Never does anything that can be directly traced back to him. Always has some ranch hand do the dirty work, then fires the man if questions get too pointed." "There must be some recourse," Elizabeth protested. "Surely the law's thin out here," Lucas said quietly. "Sheriff does what he can, but his jurisdiction is limited and his resources more so." "What about selling?" Martha suggested hesitantly. "I know you love that ranch, Lucas, but if Walton's determined—" "I won't be driven off my own land," Lucas replied, his tone leaving no room for argument. That ranch represents 5 years of saving every penny, working dawn to dusk. It's not just property to me, it's a future. His eyes met Elizabeth's briefly, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition that perhaps he wasn't just speaking of his own future now. After dinner, Lucas walked Elizabeth back to Mrs. Hollister's, both of them quiet with their thoughts. The evening air was cool, stars emerging in the darkening sky above them. "I'm sorry about the dance," Lucas said eventually. "With everything happening at the ranch, I may not be able to attend after all." "I understand," Elizabeth assured him, though disappointment coursed through her. "It's not what I want," he added, stopping to face her. "Elizabeth, these past 2 weeks getting to know you, it's been unexpected, important." Her heart quickened at his words. "For me as well." Lucas took her hand gently. "Walton's threats concern me. Not for myself, I can handle whatever he throws at me, but I don't want you caught in the middle of this feud." "I'm made of sterner stuff than Howard Walton realizes," Elizabeth replied, squeezing his hand. "Besides, the school board hired me for my qualifications, not my social connections." "Even so, we should be careful." Lucas's expression was troubled. "The adult classes can continue, that's educational business, but perhaps we should limit other contact until this situation resolves." Though his suggestion was sensible, Elizabeth felt a pang of regret. "If you think that's best." "I don't," he admitted with a rueful smile. "But I want to protect you, your reputation, your position here. You've worked too hard to have it threatened because of me." They had reached Mrs. Hollister's, and Elizabeth turned to face him fully. "Lucas, I appreciate your concern, truly. But I make my own decisions about who deserves my friendship and regard." Their eyes held for a long moment, and Lucas seemed about to say something more when the door opened behind them. Mrs. Hollister appeared, her expression curious. "Evening, Mr. Calloway," she greeted him. "Miss Sutton, you have a visitor waiting. Mr. Chapman from the school board wants to discuss some budget matters." "On Sunday evening?" Elizabeth asked, surprised. "Said it was urgent," Mrs. Hollister replied with a slight shrug. Lucas released Elizabeth's hand reluctantly. "I should go. We'll talk more soon." As Elizabeth watched him walk away, she couldn't shake the feeling that Walton's influence was already at work, creating separation between them through indirect means. With a sigh, she turned to face whatever urgent matter the school board member had invented to interrupt her evening with Lucas. The next week brought increased tensions in Casa Grande. Elizabeth continued her regular classes during the day, but noticed certain students missing, including the 3 Walton grandchildren who had attended the first week. When she inquired, their mother informed her stiffly that the children would indeed be sent to Phoenix for schooling, as the local option was insufficient for their needs. Tuesday evening's adult class proceeded as planned, though Lucas remained more distant, focusing entirely on helping his men with their lessons and avoiding any private conversation with Elizabeth. The change hurt more than she wanted to admit, especially as she could see it pained him as well. On Wednesday afternoon, Elizabeth was summoned to an unexpected meeting with the school board. Mayor Chapman, Ben Williams, and 3 other town leaders, including Howard Walton, were waiting for her in the town hall. "Miss Sutton," Mayor Chapman began uncomfortably, "certain concerns have been raised about extracurricular activities at the school." "I'm not sure I understand," Elizabeth replied, though she had a sinking feeling she understood perfectly well. "The evening classes," Walton interjected. "Using school property for private lessons without board approval, questionable use of resources paid for by taxpayers." "The adult education class benefits the community," Elizabeth responded calmly. "Literate ranch hands become better citizens, more engaged in civic matters, more productive workers." "Admirable sentiment," Walton said with a thin smile, But procedures exist for a reason. Proper channels should have been followed. Ben Williams cleared his throat. Howard's technically correct, Miss Sutton. Board approval is required for use of the building outside regular hours. However, he added, giving Walton a hard look, I see no reason why approval can't be granted retroactively and for future classes. A tense discussion followed, with Walton raising various procedural objections while Ben and Mayor Chapman sought compromise. Eventually, it was agreed that the adult classes could continue, but with formal documentation, regular reports to the board, and most troubling to Elizabeth, a requirement that at least 2 board members attend each session to observe the proceedings. This is highly irregular, Elizabeth protested. Adult students may be uncomfortable with observers, particularly when they're just beginning to learn. Take it or leave it, Walton replied, not bothering to hide his satisfaction. Board has responsibilities to the community. With no real choice, Elizabeth agreed to the conditions. As the meeting adjourned, Ben Williams held her back briefly. I'm sorry about this, he said quietly. Walton's using his position to make trouble, but he can't stop the classes entirely without looking petty. Just be careful. He's not a man who gives up easily when he wants something. What he wants is Lucas's ranch, Elizabeth replied. I'm simply collateral damage. Ben's expression was sympathetic. Lucas is fortunate to have your support. Just know that Walton can make things difficult for both of you if he chooses. That evening, Elizabeth wrote a note to Lucas explaining the new arrangements for the adult classes. His reply arrived the next morning, a terse acknowledgement that perhaps it would be best to suspend the classes temporarily until matters settled. Reading between the lines, Elizabeth understood he was trying to protect her from further conflict with Walton and the board. For nearly 2 weeks, Elizabeth saw Lucas only at church, where they exchanged brief, polite greetings but nothing more. She threw herself into her teaching duties, determined not to let personal disappointment affect her students. The children responded well to her methods, and despite the absence of the Walton grandchildren, enrollment actually increased as word spread of the new teacher's effectiveness. The Founders' Day dance approached, and Elizabeth found herself helping with decorations more out of obligation than enthusiasm. Without Lucas's escort, the event had lost much of its appeal, though she intended to attend regardless. 2 days before the dance, Elizabeth stayed late at the schoolhouse, preparing end-of-month assessments. As darkness fell, she heard horses approaching, multiple riders moving quickly. Fear gripped her as the memory of Walton's veiled threats returned. She moved to the window, then relaxed as she recognized Miguel Ortiz dismounting hurriedly. Opening the door, she called out, "Miguel, is something wrong?" The foreman rushed toward her, his expression grave. "Miss Sutton, thank God you're still here. It's the boss, Lucas. There's been an accident at the ranch. He's asking for you." Elizabeth's heart seized. "What happened? Is he badly hurt?" "Fire in the barn," Miguel explained as she grabbed her shawl. "We got the horses out, but part of the roof collapsed. Lucas was inside, got hit by a falling beam. Doc Jenkins is with him, but—" He hesitated. "It doesn't look good, señorita." Without hesitation, Elizabeth locked the schoolhouse and mounted the spare horse Miguel had brought. Propriety and town gossip meant nothing compared to Lucas's need. They rode hard through the gathering darkness, Elizabeth's mind filled with terrible possibilities. When they reached the ranch, the smell of smoke still hung heavy in the air. The barn was partially collapsed, its charred timbers still smoldering despite efforts to douse the flames. Ranch hands moved about purposefully, securing livestock and salvaging what could be saved. Rosa met them at the house, her face drawn with worry. "He's in his room," she told Elizabeth. "Doctor is with him still." Elizabeth followed her inside, bracing herself for what she might find. Lucas lay on his bed, pale and still, a bloodied bandage around his head. His right arm was splinted and bound to his chest, and angry red burns marked the left side of his face and neck. Dr. Jenkins, a grizzled man in his 60s, looked up as they entered. "Miss Sutton," he acknowledged her. "Patient's been asking for you, stubborn as always." "How bad is it?" she asked, moving to Lucas's bedside. "Broken arm, 2 cracked ribs, concussion, burns. Smoke inhalation's my biggest concern right now." The doctor straightened up. "He needs rest, clean bandages, and someone to watch for fever." "I've done what I can for now." At the sound of their voices, Lucas's eyes fluttered open. "Elizabeth!" His voice was raspy, barely audible. "I'm here," she said, taking his uninjured hand gently. "Lie still. Fire wasn't accidental," he managed. "Saw someone running away, doctor." Jenkins and Rosa exchanged concerned glances. "I'll return tomorrow," the doctor said. "Send for me sooner if fever develops or if he has trouble breathing." After he departed, Rosa touched Elizabeth's shoulder. "I will bring fresh water and bandages. Will you stay with him?" "Of course," Elizabeth replied without hesitation. Left alone with Lucas, Elizabeth felt tears threatening for the first time. She blinked them back, knowing she needed strength, not emotion. "You gave us all quite a scare, Mr. Calloway," she said, attempting lightness. A faint smile touched his lips. "Back to Mr. Calloway, am I? Only when you frighten me," she replied softly. "Sorry about that." His eyes closed briefly, pain evident in his features. "Didn't mean to drag you into this." "You didn't drag me anywhere. I came willingly." Elizabeth gently brushed hair from his forehead, careful to avoid the bandaged area. "Miguel says you believe the fire was deliberate." Lucas nodded slightly, wincing at the movement. "Saw someone, couldn't identify. Too dark. But timing. Too convenient." Elizabeth understood his implication. "Walton." "No proof," Lucas whispered. "Never is." Rosa returned with supplies, and together the women changed Lucas's bandages. He endured their ministrations stoically, though Elizabeth could tell from his shallow breathing and clenched jaw that he was in considerable pain. When they finished, Rosa insisted on preparing a bedroom for Elizabeth. "You cannot ride back to town tonight, señorita. Too dangerous. You will stay here." Elizabeth knew she should protest staying overnight at a bachelor's ranch, even under these circumstances, would provide endless fodder for gossip, but she couldn't bring herself to leave Lucas. "Thank you, Rosa. I'll stay with him for now. Call me if you need help with anything else." Once Rosa had gone, Lucas's eyes found Elizabeth's again. "You shouldn't. Your reputation." "My reputation is not my primary concern at the moment," she told him firmly. "You need care and I'm here to provide it. Now rest." Surprisingly, he complied, his eyes closing as exhaustion claimed him. Elizabeth maintained her vigil through the night, checking his breathing regularly, changing cool compresses for his burns and monitoring for fever. Sometime past midnight, Miguel brought her coffee and a report on the ranch. "Men are taking turns watching," he told her. "In case whoever started the fire returns. We saved most of the horses and tack. Building can be replaced." "Has this happened before?" Elizabeth asked. "Fires, I mean." Miguel shook his head. "Not fire, but each problem gets worse. First small things, now this." His expression darkened. If Boss had been trapped longer in that barn. He didn't need to finish the thought. Elizabeth shuddered at how close Lucas had come to death might still be if infection or fever took hold. "Get some rest, Miguel," she advised. "I'll watch over him." As dawn approached, Lucas grew restless, murmuring in his sleep. Elizabeth placed a hand on his forehead and was alarmed to find it hot to the touch. She immediately set about bringing his temperature down, applying cold compresses and spooning water between his lips when she could rouse him enough. Rosa appeared at first light, taking one look at the situation before sending a ranch hand for the doctor. "Fever has set in," she confirmed grimly. "Not unexpected with such injuries." For the next several hours they fought the fever together. Dr. Jenkins returned, administered medications, and redressed the burns, which were beginning to show signs of infection. "Next 24 hours will tell," he said before departing again. "Keep him cool, get fluids into him when possible. That's all we can do now." Elizabeth sent a message to Mrs. Hollister explaining her absence and asking for clean clothes to be sent with the messenger. She knew her continued presence at the ranch would be noted and discussed throughout Casa Grande, but found she cared little for such concerns. Lucas needed her, and she would not abandon him for the sake of propriety. Throughout that day and the next, Lucas drifted between consciousness and delirium. In his more lucid moments, he recognized Elizabeth, sometimes apologizing for the trouble he was causing, other times simply watching her with an expression that made her heart ache with unspoken feelings. During one such period of clarity as evening approached on the second day, he caught her hand weakly. "Elizabeth," he whispered, "in case I don't you dare," she interrupted fiercely. "Don't you dare say goodbye to me, Lucas Calloway. You're going to recover fully." A ghost of his usual smile touched his lips. "Stubborn woman." "Precisely the kind of woman a stubborn man needs," she replied, blinking back tears. His fingers tightened slightly on hers. "Wanted to tell you, should have told you sooner. I love you, Elizabeth Sutton." The words hung between them, precious and terrifying in their simplicity. Elizabeth felt something break open inside her, a dam of emotion she'd been holding back since the moment they'd met. "I love you too," she whispered, leaning close to press her lips gently to his forehead. "So you must get well. That's an order, Mr. Calloway." His eyes held hers for a long moment before drifting closed again. Elizabeth continued her vigil, hope warring with fear as the night wore on. By morning, she detected a change. His breathing seemed easier, his skin less hot to the touch. When Dr. Jenkins arrived for his daily visit, he confirmed her observation. "Fever's breaking," he announced after examining Lucas. "Burns look better, 2 infections receding. He's not out of danger yet, but if he continues improving at this rate, I'd say he'll recover." The relief that flooded through Elizabeth was so intense she had to sit down. For 3 days, she'd operated on determination and fear, barely sleeping, eating only when Rosa insisted. Now, with the immediate crisis passing, exhaustion claimed her. Rosa guided her to the small bedroom they'd prepared, insisting she rest. "I will watch him now, señorita. You have done enough. Sleep." Elizabeth didn't remember her head touching the pillow. When she woke, sunlight was streaming through the window, suggesting it was well past morning. Alarmed, she hurried to Lucas's room, only to find him propped up slightly against pillows, pale but alert, with Miguel reading aloud from a newspaper at his bedside. "Good morning," Lucas greeted her, his voice still weak but clearer than it had been. "Or afternoon, rather." "You're better," she said, relief evident in her tone. "Thanks to you, according to everyone here." His eyes, though shadowed with pain, held warmth as they regarded her. "Miguel says you didn't leave my side for 2 days. 3, Miguel corrected with a smile. "The señorita is very dedicated." He stood, folding the newspaper. "I will tell Rosa you are awake. She will want to bring food." After he left, Elizabeth moved to Lucas's bedside, assessing his appearance with a critical eye. "Your color is better. How's the pain?" "Manageable," he replied, then added more honestly, "Hurts like hell, but I'll live." "Yes, you will," Elizabeth agreed firmly. "Though I imagine it will be weeks before you're fully recovered." Lucas sighed, frustration evident in his expression. "Ranch can't run itself that long." "Miguel seems very capable, and I imagine your other men are equally loyal. They are, he acknowledged. But Walton will see this as an opportunity. If he's behind the fire, and I'm certain he won't stop now. Elizabeth took his hand, careful of the burns on his arm. Then we'll have to be more clever than Howard Walton. Lucas raised an eyebrow. We? Yes, we, she replied firmly. I'm involved now, whether you like it or not. A complex series of emotions crossed Lucas's face: concern, tenderness, and something like wonder. About what I said during the fever, about loving you. Did you mean it? Elizabeth asked directly. Yes, he answered without hesitation, though I had planned a more romantic setting for that declaration, and better timing. I meant what I said too, she told him, her cheeks warming. Though I agree the timing leaves something to be desired. Lucas's uninjured hand moved to touch her cheek gently. You should know what you're getting into, Elizabeth. I'm a man with enemies, it seems. A small ranch constantly under threat. Not the secure future someone of your background deserves. I think I'm capable of deciding what future I deserve, Elizabeth replied, and I choose one with you in it, difficulties and all. The moment was interrupted by Rosa's arrival with a tray of food. The older woman took one look at their expressions and smiled knowingly. Ah, finally you tell each other, eh? About time. Now eat, both of you. Love is good, but food is necessary. Over the next week, Lucas's recovery progressed steadily. Elizabeth reluctantly returned to her teaching duties in town, though she rode to the ranch each afternoon once school dismissed. The arrangement raised eyebrows in Casa Grande, but Elizabeth found she cared less and less about gossip. When Howard Walton appeared at a school board meeting to suggest her behavior was unbecoming a teacher, Ben Williams and Mayor Chapman firmly defended her right to tend a sick friend. Besides, Ben added pointedly, if you're so concerned about propriety, Howard, perhaps you'd explain why your ranch hand Tom Fisher was seen near Calloway's property the night of the fire. This revelation caused a stir among the board members. Walton vehemently denied any connection, but the seed of suspicion had been planted. Sheriff Davis promised to question Fisher, though few expected the investigation to yield results. Ranch hands loyal to Walton would hardly implicate their employer. The Founders' Day dance came and went without either Lucas or Elizabeth in attendance. Instead, they spent that evening on the ranch house porch, Lucas finally well enough to sit outside briefly, wrapped in blankets against the evening chill. They talked for hours about everything and nothing: their childhoods, dreams, favorite books, and plans for the future. I want to expand the school eventually, Elizabeth shared. Casa Grande is growing. We'll need more than one teacher soon, perhaps a proper school building with multiple classrooms. The town would benefit from that, Lucas agreed. And the ranch. I've been considering expanding too. The property adjoining mine to the south might be available soon. Old man Peterson's getting too frail to work it himself. They carefully avoided discussing Walton directly, though his shadow loomed over Lucas's plans. If the harassment continued, expansion would be difficult if not impossible. As spring advanced into early summer, Lucas's strength gradually returned. His broken arm remained splinted, and the burns had left scars that would likely never fully fade, but he was able to resume limited duties around the ranch. Elizabeth continued her daily visits, often bringing books to read aloud or discussing the progress of both her day students and the adult class, which had resumed with Ben Williams attending as the required board observer. Their relationship deepened during this period of forced convalescence, moving beyond the initial attraction into something more profound: a partnership of equals, built on mutual respect and shared values. Lucas found in Elizabeth not only a beautiful, intelligent woman who somehow loved him despite his scars and troubled past, but also a formidable ally whose strategic mind complemented his practical approach to problems. It was Elizabeth who eventually proposed a solution to the Walton situation. "We need leverage," she said one evening as they sat at Lucas's kitchen table reviewing ranch accounts. "Something Walton values more than your water rights." "His reputation is all I can think of," Lucas replied, "and that's hardly tangible. But important to him nonetheless," Elizabeth mused. "He presents himself as a respectable businessman and civic leader. What if that image were threatened? We have no proof of his involvement in the fire or other incidents," Lucas reminded her. "Just suspicion." "Then we need to create a situation where he reveals himself," Elizabeth said, her eyes lighting with determination. "Or better yet, where his own ambition works against him." The plan they formulated was risky but elegant in its simplicity. Lucas would let word spread that financial difficulties, following the fire, had left him considering selling the ranch after all. Meanwhile, Elizabeth would use her connections with the ladies' auxiliary to circulate news that the territorial governor was considering Casa Grande for a new regional school, a prestigious project that would bring considerable investment and status to whichever town was selected. "The key is the timing," Elizabeth explained. "We make sure Walton hears about the school project just before he thinks you're ready to sell. He'll want both your land for its water rights and the school project for the prestige and property value increase." Lucas nodded slowly, seeing the strategy. "And when he moves to secure both simultaneously, we'll have witnesses to whatever underhanded tactics he employs," Elizabeth finished. "Either way, his reputation suffers or he's forced to back down." The plan took weeks to implement properly. Lucas met with the bank publicly, discussing loans and making a show of financial strain. Elizabeth cultivated a correspondence with education officials in Tucson, ensuring that letters bearing official territorial seals arrived regularly at the schoolhouse where curious eyes might notice. Howard Walton took the bait exactly as they'd anticipated. He approached Lucas with an offer for the ranch insultingly low, but presented as a neighborly gesture to help during difficult times. "I'll need a few days to consider," Lucas told him, projecting reluctance and resignation. "Don't wait too long," Walton advised with poorly concealed satisfaction. "Offer won't last forever." The following day, at the ladies' auxiliary meeting, Martha Williams accidentally mentioned the governor's interest in Casa Grande for the regional school. "Of course, it's not finalized," she added, giving Elizabeth a conspiratorial glance, "but Miss Sutton's connections in Tucson suggest our town is top of the list." By that afternoon, Howard Walton had requested a private meeting with Elizabeth at the schoolhouse. She agreed, making sure Ben Williams and Mayor Chapman were conveniently nearby, ostensibly reviewing building repairs. Walton arrived precisely at 4, his manner superficially cordial though his eyes were calculating as ever. "Miss Sutton, I understand you've been corresponding with education officials about a potential regional school project." "Word travels quickly," Elizabeth observed, neither confirming nor denying. "Casa Grande would certainly benefit from such an institution," Walton continued. "As a school board member and property owner, I'm naturally interested in supporting educational advancement." "How generous of you, Mr. Walton," Elizabeth replied, maintaining a neutral expression despite her distaste for the man. "Though I understood you preferred sending your own grandchildren to Phoenix for their education." Walton waved this away. "A temporary arrangement. With proper facilities and leadership here in Casa Grande, they would certainly return." He leaned forward slightly. "I understand the territory would need suitable land for such a project." As it happens, I own several prime parcels that would be perfect. Indeed, how fortunate. Elizabeth allowed a thoughtful expression to cross her face. Though I believe the governor's representatives were particularly impressed with the location near the creek. The water access would be ideal for the school grounds and planned gardens. Walton's expression sharpened. The creek? You mean the one running through Calloway's property? Possibly, Elizabeth said vaguely. I'm not privy to all the details, of course. Calloway's considering selling, Walton said, watching her reaction carefully. Financial troubles after that unfortunate fire. Is that so? Elizabeth kept her tone merely interested. How sad. He seemed quite attached to his ranch. Business is business, Walton shrugged. Now, Miss Sutton, I believe we could help each other. If I were to acquire Calloway's property and donate a portion for the school project, the territory would surely look favorably on Casa Grande's application. That's an interesting proposition, Elizabeth replied, though I'm not sure what you're suggesting I could do to help you. Walton's pretense of civility slipped slightly. Don't be coy, Miss Sutton. Your influence with the Education Board is obvious. A letter of recommendation from you, supporting my offer of land, would carry weight. And in return, Elizabeth prompted, wanting him to state his intentions explicitly. In return, Walton said, lowering his voice despite the empty schoolhouse, certain concerns about your professional conduct might be permanently set aside. The board values your teaching, naturally, but questions have been raised about propriety. Your frequent visits to Calloway's ranch, for instance. Are you threatening my position, Mr. Walton? Elizabeth asked directly. Merely pointing out political realities, he replied smoothly. We could both benefit from cooperation. Alternatively, the implied threat hung in the air between them. Elizabeth allowed the silence to stretch deliberately before responding. Mr. Walton, I believe we understand each other perfectly. She rose from her desk. I'll need time to consider your proposal. Perhaps we could meet again tomorrow. Same time. Walton nodded, satisfied that his intimidation had been effective. Tomorrow, then. I trust you'll make the sensible decision, Miss Sutton. After he departed, Elizabeth waited several minutes before signaling through the window to Ben Williams, who had positioned himself within earshot of the schoolhouse during the meeting. He entered, accompanied by Mayor Chapman and, to Elizabeth's surprise, Sheriff Davis. Got most of that, the sheriff confirmed grimly. Not enough for formal charges, but certainly improper influence and implied threats to a public employee. Combined with what we heard last week when he approached Lucas, Ben added, it paints a clear picture of Walton's methods. Will it be enough? Elizabeth asked anxiously. Mayor Chapman nodded. The town council has been divided on Walton's influence for years. This gives his opponents ammunition to challenge his position on various boards and committees. And, he added with satisfaction, I've already telegraphed Judge Wilson about presiding over a special hearing regarding the ranch incidents. The next phase of their plan unfolded the following day. When Walton arrived for his meeting with Elizabeth, he found not just her but also Lucas, Sheriff Davis, Mayor Chapman, and several town council members waiting. What's this? He demanded, immediately suspicious. A conversation about the future of Casa Grande, Mayor Chapman replied pleasantly. Please join us. Trapped by propriety and witnesses, Walton had no choice but to take the offered seat. For the next hour, Lucas and Elizabeth systematically dismantled his schemes, presenting evidence of his attempts at intimidation and connecting, though circumstantially, his ranch hands to various incidents of vandalism at the Calloway property. There is no regional school project, Elizabeth finally revealed. It was a fiction designed to expose your methods, Mr. Walton, and Mr. Calloway's ranch is not for sale. It never was. Walton's face reddened with fury and embarrassment. This is outrageous. A conspiracy to defame me. No conspiracy, Sheriff Davis countered. Just citizens tired of bullying and underhanded tactics. Now, about your ranch hand Tom Fisher, I'd like to question him again about his whereabouts the night of the barn fire. This isn't over, Walton snarled, rising from his chair. You'll regret making an enemy of me, Calloway. And you, Miss Sutton, your teaching days in this territory are finished. I think not, Mayor Chapman interjected firmly. The town council will be reviewing all board memberships next week. I wouldn't count on retaining your position on the school board, Howard. The confrontation ended with Walton storming out, but the damage to his reputation and influence was done. Over the following weeks, he was gradually removed from his positions of authority in town governance. And while nothing could be proven conclusively about the ranch incidents, the scrutiny made further sabotage too risky. Eventually, Walton's son took over more control of their ranch operations, proving more reasonable in his dealings with neighbors, if only to distance the family business from his father's tarnished reputation. By midsummer, life had settled into a new rhythm for Lucas and Elizabeth. The ranch prospered under Lucas's recovered leadership, and the school year concluded with impressive progress from Elizabeth's students. Their relationship, tested by fire both literal and figurative, had emerged stronger, their love deepened by shared challenges overcome. On the last day of the school term, Lucas waited for Elizabeth outside the schoolhouse, his arm finally free of its splint, though the scars from the burns remained visible on his neck and face. The children scattered around him, their excited summer energy a counterpoint to his calm presence. "Mr. Calloway," Emma Williams called, skipping up to him. "Are you going to marry Miss Sutton? My mama says you are." Lucas smiled at the child's directness. "That's between Miss Sutton and me, Emma, but I'd certainly like to ask her." "You should," Emma advised seriously. "She's the best teacher ever." "I think so too," Lucas agreed. When the last child had departed, Elizabeth emerged, looking beautiful in a light summer dress, her chestnut hair loosely arranged to accommodate the June heat. She smiled at the sight of Lucas waiting for her. "Finished for the summer?" he asked, taking the book she carried. "Until September," she confirmed. "Though I've promised summer reading lessons to 5 students who need extra help, and the adult class will continue weekly." "Always teaching," Lucas observed with admiration. "It's my calling," she replied simply. "How are things at the ranch?" "Good. The new section of barn is almost complete, and the summer grazing looks promising." He offered his arm, which she took naturally, and they began walking toward the center of town. "I was thinking we might ride up to the north pasture this weekend. There's something there I'd like to show you." Elizabeth raised a questioning eyebrow. "Mysterious. Should I be intrigued or concerned?" "Intrigued, I hope." Lucas's expression was warm but nervous in a way she hadn't seen before. That Saturday dawned clear and hot, typical Arizona summer weather. Lucas arrived at Mrs. Hollister's on horseback, leading a gentle mare for Elizabeth. They rode out of town together, drawing knowing smiles from townspeople who had long since accepted their courtship as a settled matter. The ride to the north pasture took nearly an hour, but Elizabeth enjoyed every moment. She had become a competent rider under Lucas's tutelage over the past months, and loved seeing the ranch through his eyes, the careful management of grazing lands, the new calves frolicking in the distance, the precious water sources protected and enhanced. Lucas guided them toward a small rise crowned with cottonwood trees, where a creek formed a natural pool before continuing on its journey through the property. It was cooler here in the shade, with a breeze that offered relief from the summer heat. "It's beautiful," Elizabeth said as they dismounted. "I don't think I've been to this part of the ranch before." "It's my favorite spot on the property," Lucas told her, spreading a blanket beneath the largest tree. "Apart from the creek by the house, that is." They shared the simple picnic lunch Rosa had prepared: fried chicken, corn bread, and apple pie still warm from the oven, while discussing plans and dreams. Lucas seemed uncharacteristically distracted, his gaze often drifting to the view or back to Elizabeth's face, as if memorizing her features. "Lucas," she finally said, reaching for his hand, "what's troubling you? You've been nervous all day." He took a deep breath, squeezing her fingers gently. "Not troubled, just important moments deserve proper attention." "Important moments," Elizabeth echoed, her heart suddenly racing. Lucas shifted to face her more directly. "Elizabeth Sutton, you came into my life unexpectedly that night at the inn. Since then, you've become essential to me in ways I never imagined possible. Your intelligence, your courage, your heart. Everything about you amazes me daily." "Lucas," Elizabeth whispered, tears threatening as she recognized what was coming. He reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small box. "I wanted to bring you here, to the most beautiful place I know, to ask if you would make me the happiest man in Arizona territory by becoming my wife." Opening the box, he revealed a delicate gold ring with a small diamond flanked by 2 sapphires that matched his eyes. "It was my mother's," he explained softly. "The only thing of value I kept from my life before the war." Elizabeth's vision blurred with tears as she looked from the ring to the man offering it, this good, honorable man who had captured her heart so completely. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, Lucas, I will marry you." His smile was radiant as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if meant for her all along. Drawing her close, Lucas kissed her with tender passion, a promise of the life they would build together. When they finally drew apart, Elizabeth rested her forehead against his. "I never imagined when I left Boston that I'd find not just a teaching position but a home, a purpose, and the love of my life. And I never thought giving up my hotel room would lead to this," Lucas replied with a chuckle. "Best decision I ever made." "For both of us," Elizabeth agreed, kissing him again. They were married in September, just before the new school term began. The entire town turned out for the celebration. Even Howard Walton's son and grandchildren, though the elder Walton himself was conspicuously absent, having retreated to Phoenix to lick his wounds and salvage what business connections he could. Elizabeth continued teaching, eventually realizing her dream of expanding the school as Casa Grande grew. Lucas's ranch prospered, becoming one of the most successful operations in the territory thanks to his progressive methods and careful management. Together, they built a legacy of education and opportunity, raising 3 children of their own, 2 sons and a daughter, all of whom grew up with their mother's love of learning and their father's quiet strength. Years later, when their grandchildren asked how they had met, Lucas would tell the story of the night he gave up his comfortable bed to sleep in a stable, beginning the greatest adventure of his life. And Elizabeth would smile, remembering how a simple act of kindness had led to a love that transformed them both, bringing together a Boston schoolteacher and an Arizona rancher in the most unlikely and perfect of matches. Each time Lucas recounted the tale, his eyes would meet Elizabeth's across the room, still filled with the same wonder and devotion as that day beneath the cottonwoods. And in that shared glance was the acknowledgement of a truth they had learned together. That love, when found in unexpected places, was the greatest blessing of all.